Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to another powerful episode on Seekers of Christ on Gospel First. I'm your host, Joe Cirillo, and today's show is going to be absolutely incredible. Now, I'm honored to introduce Professor Shima Baradaran, and she is the Woodruff J. Dean Professor of Law at BYU Law School, a distinguished fellow at the Whitley Institute, and leading scholar on criminal justice reform and the intersection of religion and human flourishing. Now, she's also authored and co authored 3 books and over 30 articles, with work featured in the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, and NPR. Professor Baughman's remarkable journey began in Iran, where, as a young Muslim girl, she witnessed her mother's betrayal by a family member who had her sent to one of the world's harshest prisons during a time of war. Now, this traumatic experience led her family to find healing in Christ's atonement, a theme that now inspires her scholarship and advocacy. In addition to her impactful academic work, Professor Baughman is a mother of 5, Kian, Darian, Milo, June, and Teza, and enjoys hiking, hunting for antiques, and learning golf, keeping up with her husband, Ryan. Now, so let's hear her story and her family story of how Christ came to their rescue. So let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Gospel First, to this new episode of Seekers of Christ. We have a very special guest, Professor Shima Baradaran Baughman. Did I say that right, Sister Shima?
It's Baughman is easier, but yeah, that's what I usually go by, Professor Baughman.
Sister Baughman. Well, we're
Yes.
certainly honored to have you on today. I mean, I've just listened to a lot of your podcasts, or a lot of shows that you've been on, and I'm just so grateful that I was able to have you come on ours. So as we start, one thing that's really surprised me, or shouldn't surprise me, but just impressed me, that a mother of 5 children, and your husband's quite busy, and you got so many things happening with your professor at BYU, and articles that you write. How do you do it?
Oh, I know. It's so funny. So I wonder that same thing often, honestly, but and I don't talk about my kids a lot on the podcast, but I'm glad you brought them up first, because they are my, the most important part of my life. I'd give up any of my career accolades, any of my books, anything I've ever done in my career life for any one of my kids, because they're all so precious to me. So they're definitely my priority. And I try to do my work, kind of with them. So right now, for instance, I work at home. I teach at BYU Law, and I work at the Wheatley Institute, but I'm blessed to be able to go down there right now once a week, and then next semester twice a week. So I'm able to kind of work with my daughter at home. I have a little 1.5-year-old. My others are at school, college, and high school. And so I kind of, and there's been years. So I wrote a book on bail in 2017. Well, I was supposed to write in 2016, but I had a baby and I was pregnant. And so then I was a year late. And so there are things, and it's like over time, those things don't matter. But I've always tried to prioritize my family in everything. And so it's been great to be able to have my kids, and they're all spaced out, which actually does make it a little bit easier. I had the 2, had some years while they were in school, to crank out some things. Now I have some more little kids. And so I'm managing that, but the kids are such a blessing. I just can't even say enough about them.
Well, we have 5 children of our own and 12 grandchildren.
Really?
And I'll tell you,
Wow.
when you space them out properly, I guess, as the Lord blesses us accordingly.
That's right.
It's pretty amazing how they all take care of each other as they grow.
They do. That's true. That's true. I was thinking about that yesterday. It's like, now my younger ones, the 7 and 5-year-old, can really help with the baby. And so it really is so helpful. And then I had 2 older ones together, kind of a year, about 2 years and a half apart. And so they were just best friends and occupied each other. So it does. And it's funny because the Lord's timing is not always yours. If it was my timing, I would have had my final one a few years earlier, but his timing was different, and it was so inspired, as always, right?
Right.
His timing's always better than mine. So I love that.
That's right. It's his timing. That's what we got to remember.
Yes.
It's always his timing.
That's right.
Well,
That's right.
Sister Shima, growing up, you come from the great land of Iran, right?
Yes.
as a young Muslim girl, what was it like for you
Yeah.
growing up in that country?
Yeah. So, there's I'll talk about the positives and then the difficult things. But as a country and people, the Persian culture, the country has a lot of heritage. So, art, my home was filled with Persian rugs. And I remember being taught how to make them. So my dad's family, his dad imported rugs. So they were from this part of Iran that bordered Iraq. And so he would trade rugs. And so he made rugs, his mom made rugs, his sisters, so this was a big part of our culture, was just this art, this beautiful
Mhm.
art form of rugs and poetry. And I remember as a little kid, my family was religious. And so my mom, would teach us to pray. And so that was such a kind of beautiful thing to learn. The way the Muslims pray is like, it's very active. So you're standing, you're sitting, you're kneeling. And so as a kid, I kind of resonated with this kind of like, okay, stand up. And then I sit. And so, but just being taught this reverence for God early on was a beautiful thing. I also grew up during a massive war. So Saddam Hussein had attacked Iran after the revolution, where the Ayatollah Khomeini took over and Iran became an Islamic theocracy. And so it was quite perilous times when I grew up. And I remember as a little kid, it's kindergarten, first grade in Iran, and we would go into our basement and put towels on our faces because Saddam Hussein was bombing with gas in Tehran, and that's where I live. So it was always like, are we going to get bombed tonight? And hoping we didn't, and we were blessed to not be injured in that. But there was a lot of difficult times, and my mom had a prison sentence in that. I don't know if you want me to talk about that whole thing, but yeah, lots of turmoil with the government in Iran.
Well, it's really amazing. We're so blessed here that we've never really had anything of that great turmoil. My heart always goes out to those areas where it's war torn, and we pray for those children. And I mean,
Yes,
adults is one thing, but the children that are so innocent that are
right.
affected by it. So I was just wondering how life as a young girl in that area, especially in those kind of
Yeah.
difficult times. Now, you mentioned that your mother was imprisoned. Do you mind if I ask why? Or
Yes, I can talk about that. So first I'll tell you how my perspective as a kid is, I remember so a couple things. Some of the things that really stuck out in my memory were that, I love candy. I still do. I love treats. I remember going to we had a little neighborhood market that was just a block or two away. And my sister and I would walk over there every day, wondering when the candy would come in. And so every like month or two, they'd get like a little bit of candy that was brought in. I mean, we just weren't getting a lot of things because of the war, right? There's
Mhm,
not a lot of
mhm.
trade, not a lot of things coming in. And I remember my dad went to the market one day and got strawberries, and we all had our little portion of strawberries, and we were so excited to eat them. And one time he brought a banana, and we cut it into fourths because at the time it was my sister and I and my parents. Like everyone got a little piece of this banana because bananas were imported. You don't get them anywhere in the Middle East. So things like that, I remember growing up, like how precious it was to have some fruit that we didn't have locally. And, that was some of the crazy things. And then aside from that, the other thing I really remember, this was kind of horrible, is like we'd go to school. And I remember at the beginning of each day, in the US, you do a Pledge of Allegiance. And I remember that when I came to the US, but in Iran, what you'd have to do, you'd say three different things. It was Marg Bar America, Marg Bar Saddam, Marg Bar Israel. And so you'd say death to America, death to Saddam
Oh,
Hussein, death to
wow.
Israel. And I'm like 5 and I don't even know what I'm saying, but this is what you chant at school, that you're taught this as a little kid. And it's, obviously so I'll tell you about the political prison. My mom was actually thrown in prison because she didn't like this government that came in. She was fighting for democracy in Iran. A lot of people were. She was at this hotbed of political activism, the University of Tehran, and a lot of people in that time were fighting for a more westernized democracy in Iran, so that Iran could be maybe the first democracy in the Middle East, which we really haven't seen one. Israel has one, but we hadn't seen one in the Muslim countries. And so she was fighting for that. But then the Ayatollah Khomeini came into power, kind of surprising to everybody. They thought that he was going to be an interim leader, but then he ended up kind of staying and becoming a permanent leader. And so my mom was really against this and wanted to, was trying to fight for change in her country. And they found out that she donated money. At this time, she had my sister and I. So she had 2 daughters at the time. she was just kind of working in these mothers groups trying to get money. She gave all of her wedding, jewelry that she was gifted to donate to this cause to try to get freedom. That's kind of, courageous and generous, like, forward, I guess, what do you call it? Community minded mother as I had is she just wanted freedom and was willing to give everything for that. And because of the money she donated to this cause, they found out and she was then imprisoned for that. She had a political treason sentence for 10 years for fighting against the government, because in Iran, there was no free speech, right? In America, you can talk all you want if you're unhappy about this president or the last one. But in Iran, you don't have that freedom. And so if you spoke against the king, you were, in prison. If you spoke against the Ayatollah Khomeini, you were also in prison. So she was put into prison for that.
And I understand that she was turned in by a family member, was it?
Yes,
Oh.
and that's the hardest thing. And I didn't know this for many years because my mom is that kind of woman that she doesn't hold a grudge. She's the most like kind, Christ-like woman you ever meet. But yeah, it's a woman in our family. She's kind of, related. So my dad's brother's wife's sister, kind of that type of thing. Yeah, but we're very close in Iran. We would always socialize. It was like, very big family groups that would get together. And she was actually tortured and was, had given the name of a bunch of family members. And I think, people were upset about it, even though, the circumstances were hard for her when she gave those names up. A lot of people held a grudge. Of course, my mom wouldn't and didn't and hasn't, because she understood that's, the circumstances under which she gave the names were horrible. And so she didn't hold a grudge. But I remember thinking, everyone else has held a grudge on behalf of my mom, but she's just not willing to do so, which is such a great example.
So she fought for freedom. And how long did she spend in prison?
So she was supposed to serve for 10 years, but after 2 years, my dad was a neurosurgeon. He did a procedure for somebody that was in the government, and it went well. And then he was able to ask for a favor from this political leader, and he was able to get my dad out in 6 months. So she served 2.5 years instead of the 10 years that she was supposed to serve.
It sounds like almost like the same story as President Nelson performing surgery on a well-known athlete. How the Lord used that individual to open up parts that were accepted.
It really was a miracle. And my mom had this amazing prophetic dream when she was in prison, and she saw, these fall colors, and she knew she was in America in this dream. And this is before she knew there was any chance of her getting out early. And she had this dream, and she's like, why am I having a dream of America? I'm in prison in Iran. And, fast forward several years, we move to LA, we find the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Ultimately, because of that decision to convert, my mom says, I'm not going back. They're going to kill me. So we decide to stay in America. We apply for asylum and are able to stay. And then, soon after, my dad, once he passes the test, he becomes a resident in New York. And that's where we end up. And the fall colors, of course, in the northeast of America are the most pronounced, most beautiful. And so my mom's dream kind of comes true, that like we were, God wanted us in America. And so it's interesting because you look at my sister and I, the ones that came, I had a little sister too, but especially the older ones where we lived through the war. I think as we saw what we went through and the sacrifices my parents went through in Iran and then came here, we both have felt this extreme obligation for me to, spreading faith and doing more to bring people into Christ, because I feel like that was the key to my experience in America, my kind of the blessings that I saw in my life were finding the church. That changed everything for my family. And hi. My little one is wanting to say hi.
Oh, beautiful.
Say hi.
Beautiful. Hello.
But say hi.
Hello.
So sweet. Yes. You want to take that? Well, so yeah, my sister as well has felt this extreme obligation she does research on banking for poor people. Like she wants to. So we both feel very much like plucked out of this, land where there was war and potential death, and coming to America and having all these blessings. I think for me, it's the faith that I've really been drawn to. And for her, it's, kind of injustice for poor people. So I just think we both have been changed by this experience, right? This miraculous thing that God allowed us to do is to come to America.
It's amazing how the Lord's opened up the doors for you. I mean, isn't it a little difficult for people to come from Iran to come to America?
I mean, it's not even like I can't even articulate. Oh, hi. Yeah, another one. There you go. This is how do we do it all? We have all these kids. I'm doing a little podcast, my love. In what, 5 minutes? Oh, I love you. Okay.
Hello.
Will you take Tezzy with you? Will you
Can
take?
I have one little treat?
Yes, you can have one little treat. Yes, they want treats. They're
Oh,
taking
wonderful.
advantage. Mom's busy, so
There
time
you
for a
go.
treat. No, but sorry, remind me of the question you asked.
Well, the question was, it's amazing how the Lord opened up the way, because it's pretty difficult for.
Oh, I was going to tell you this amazing story. I didn't even know this until more recently, but the way my parents describe it, there's so many miracles just even allowing us to get out. But we were on one of the final flights out of Iran in 1986. It was really the heat of the war, and the war just intensified for 3 more years. And so, if we had missed that flight, I mean, the fact that we even got out. So my mom was supposed to be on probation even when my dad had this opportunity to go to UCLA. She had just gotten out of prison a few years ago. She was supposed to be on probation for several more years until her, the 10 years. But they didn't catch that when we left the country, which was a miracle. And then we went to Germany to get a visa for the US, because even though we had permission to come to UCLA, we still needed a visa. And there were just hundreds and thousands of people from Iran and Iraq trying to get to America, because it is the land of freedom, of opportunity. I mean, everybody would love to be here, especially places where where you're in the Middle East, where you don't have freedom. And so just getting a visa, every step of it was such a blessing. And so, yeah, we felt extremely blessed for this.
Yeah. So were you introduced to the church in America, or were you introduced in Iran?
Oh, no. So, yeah, we were introduced in America. So what happened was my dad had this 1-year opportunity at UCLA to do a fellowship. And so we were in California, and within a few months, there was a nurse who's at UCLA who was a member of the church. She's also Persian. And she was prompted 2 different times to go speak to my dad about the gospel. And she just dismissed it both times, because she knew that he'd from Iran, that he was going to go back to Iran. She was nervous about his safety and kind of dismissed it both times. But then she describes it really, vividly, because she remembers it so well, that he was at a water fountain and she saw him and she was just having a drink, and she just had this prompting again, go speak to him about the gospel. And so she went and invited him to her Christmas party. And my family, of course, we're new immigrants. We don't have any friends. We'd come in August and December. We're still kind of trying to figure things out. And she invited us and we went to her party. My mom happened to see, she had a pamphlet on her bookshelf that said, it was the one that we used to have in the church about families being together forever.
Right.
And she read this whole thing, and on the back it said, if you're interested, the missionaries can come talk to you more about this. And so she, before leaving the party, was like, I read this pamphlet. I really like it. Can I have these missionaries come speak to me about these things? And so that's how it all started. And my mom became best friends with the missionaries, decided to get baptized, and then told my dad, they might kill me. But the cool thing is, the most inspiring, courageous thing is, she decided to get baptized before she knew that we would be able to stay in America. I mean, that was a really bold decision of hers, because, getting baptized and going back to Iran is surely a death sentence, right? It's funny because there's these underground parties in Iran right now because the government still is, as it was before, very restrictive, and you can't convert. But there's people I know that were invited to these parties, and they don't know if it's like a drinking party, because that's illegal, or like a Jesus party, because that's also illegal. And so these people are going, and so it's like, you can get in trouble for all these things, but definitely converting to Jesus Christ, right? Converting to Christianity as a Muslim is a no-go. And so anyway, she was very scared, but still did it. And so I just very proud of her courage and faith, that kind of, like you mentioned earlier, it's like there's a lot of sacrifices that people go through for their faith. And my mom definitely was willing to die for it.
Well, the women are the ones that are in some ways the true leaders when it comes to the faith experience, because it was my wife that introduced the missionaries, or I should say
Oh, really?
When the missionaries came to the door, it was her that invited them in. We were former Catholics, and, myself, I'm Italian, and my wife was Portuguese. Yeah. And when they knocked on the door, the first question is, we're Catholics. We're going to be born Catholic and we're going to die Catholic.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we had a difficult time. She was worried about what my reaction was going to be. So anyways,
wow.
Very short, it's really the mothers that seem to embrace the spirit so much more easily to the rest of the family. So, yeah.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I think about Eve, right? Our first mother, the mother of all living, and how she had this foresight of, how are we going to follow God's commandments to multiply and replenish the earth? And she, decided to make a very difficult decision to, eat of the fruit and be cast out of the garden so that we could all come to be. But yeah, I think there is like a legacy of mothers having this kind of foresight, this ability to
Right.
follow God.
So when your mother read the pamphlet, how did she introduce it to your father? Because,
Yeah,
being a male, of course,
yeah.
a little bit more strict.
That's right. Yeah, and he was never that religious. His parents really were very faithful, but my dad was a man of science and he's very analytical, and so he didn't know what to think about God in those years, but he was supportive of my mom learning more. When she got baptized, he was not going to get baptized, but he did see the good. I mean, I think he felt the spirit when we'd go to church. I think he saw the good, and he was, in his mind, it's like, these are good people. Like, I do not mind my family being one of them. And I remember years where my dad would drop us off at church. My mom would be working. Like, it was really hard once we moved to America. So, in Iran, we lived this very comfortable life, although not a free life. But when we came to America, it's like they left everything, all their land. They couldn't sell anything, right? We came with a limited amount of money that was basically gone within a year. And so they were starting completely from scratch. And so they were both working around the clock. But I do remember my dad would drop us off at church and, very much understood and saw this as a good thing. Like, even us going to BYU, like, he saw this as a good thing. Like, he was just like, wow, this is, these are good people. I respect them. I admire them. And so for that reason, he was very supportive of us being members of the church.
It's really amazing, though, that it doesn't matter which religion, I guess, maybe I might be corrected, but when people recognize goodness, they are
Yeah.
drawn to it. Doesn't matter what
Yes.
religious background. I mean, I have some Muslim friends. I have actually my
Yes.
barber is from the Muslim
Yeah.
faith. Great
Yes.
individual. As a matter of fact, he gave me the Quran, and I'm the next step when
That's
I get
awesome.
back, he'll be getting the Book of Mormon because we're talking.
Yeah.
But
I love that.
he's open, so it's just a step at a time. But
Yeah, and I think our church leaders are such good examples of that. I mean, they do give the Book of Mormon to every, kind of world leader that they meet, but they also listen a lot. They attend services of their congregations. Like, I think there's a lot of good cultural interchange and interfaith interchanges that our church does. And that's kind of what I do partly at the Wheatley Institute, is this kind of, it's a church's think tank at BYU where we do research on how religion helps society,
Mhm.
and not just our religion, but all religions, because we do recognize, as President Oaks, gave a talk a few years ago,
Mhm.
that religion is good for people, and he just said in his talk a few years ago, go to church. It doesn't have to be our church, but just go to church. And I think there is this benefit that we see. And I'm with you. It's like some of my closest friends that are not of our faith are very faithful in their own faith.
Yes.
And I think there is something beautiful about seeing that goodness and truth and light that comes from people that are, worshiping God.
Well, I truly believe that as we build
Yeah.
relationship with other individuals, the Lord puts the Latter-day Saints into place of where they're going to do the most good and draw
Yeah.
people by that friendship and that relationship building, right? That we are all brothers and sisters and we do care.
Yes.
And that's the main
Yes.
thing. So tell me, as you then early members, what was the biggest challenge that you had?
Yeah. As for my sister and I as kids, I think it was like all good. We saw no downsides. I think we integrate. I mean, it helped us, joining the church really helped us integrate into American society much more quickly
Mhm.
than I would say other people that might have immigrated without that. I mean, I remember immediately, like, everyone, I still remember back to 7, 8 years old, like, how often people would invite us to dinner to play with their kids. Like, I remember I didn't have a bike because we'd left our bikes in Iran, but people would invite us over to ride bikes. And I was so excited to ride a bike because I didn't have one anymore. But those are the types of memories, like being invited to dinner, having these exchanges. I remember my mom's visiting teacher invited us over to teach us how to make chicken nuggets. And then she came over and my mom taught her how to make a Persian dish. But
Right.
those are the types of things that happen naturally in a kind of, ministering, visiting environment that you have at church that we would never have had the privilege to have.
Mhm.
And I think we all benefited from that, right? These sisters
Mhm.
benefited from learning something from my mom, and we all benefited from learning more about American things. So I just found it such a beautiful blessing in our lives to be able to integrate into American culture in such a seamless way. Whereas I think it would have taken us a lot longer because a lot of immigrants come, they're kind of in their own communities, right? And if they're not integrated in some other way through schools or churches, it becomes hard for them to kind of assimilate. And I think we do that really well in America, more so than in Europe. I think Europe has a harder time because we are integrated in schools and stuff. So I do find that it was such a blessing for us to be members of the church growing up and have those examples. I mean, I think we saw people in our wards and really looked up, like you think of young women's or primary, and we learned so much from the members of our church. I'm still grateful for all the kindness that was shown to us. I can't even think of one bad memory of growing up in the church. I mean, really, it was all so much goodness that we experienced and so much light.
So tell me, Sister Sheba, I don't know, the question keeps coming back in the back of my mind, and that is that, when you're dealing with a situation that you've dealt with growing up and your mother was turned in by a family member, in the Muslim faith, is there the topic of forgiveness that is fairly readily given, or is it something different?
Yeah, it's a good question. This is something I actually study in my research, but forgiveness in the Islamic faith is definitely there. There's encouragement to forgive, but it's not a commandment per se. It's at the person's discretion if they want to forgive. Whereas in Christianity, it's like we're commanded to forgive not just once, not just 7 times, but 70 times 7, basically infinitely, because forgiveness depends on whether we forgive, our forgiveness and the mercy that we obtain, right? Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. And so we know that is God commands that of us, but it's not quite the same in Islam. It's not as strict a commandment. It's something nice you should do, but it's not required.
So we're commanded to forgive, but unless we are readily to forgive, the atonement is it's something that I believe that the atonement, you'll realize the atonement much more quickly by the principle of forgiving, because if we forgive, we recognize that the atonement really does cover everything because we're not perfect.
That's right.
So the topic of the atonement is something that's liberating. It makes us free because, we think it's restrictive, but the atonement is something that really liberates all of us. Now that you've been here in America, how long?
So let's see, I guess 30, like 7 plus, I'm 44. 44 minus 7, whatever that is. I guess 30 something years.
Edit that.
Yeah. Oh, I don't mind. It's fine.
The reason I asked
around there, 30 something years.
The reason I asked that is because I don't, a lot of individuals, when they come, they still have an accent. You don't have one. But the other thing too,
I don't.
As you learn the gospel and you teach it, and these principles of the atonement and forgiveness and grace and all of these things, do you think that the gospel, I've always taught my children, being a convert, we were disowned as a family from our family.
Oh, wow.
And we're sort of still not estranged, but there's quite a gap. And the reason I say that is because joining the church is always a little bit of a price to pay. Yes. Did that happen to you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, so many ways, but yes, I think for many years growing up, we were a little bit, in hiding about it, and we still are in a sense, right? There's threats to our safety being converting from Islam. I think that's something we always have to be afraid of. For me, I think I'm the only one that's actually active in my family anymore, but for me, it's always, it's something to be worried about. If I went back to Iran, I think it's something I'm scared of. I mean, it's like I'm praying for the Lord to protect me in these circumstances if I do have the chance to go to Iran, which I do love going if I have the chance, but it's been many years. But yeah, I mean, the biggest sacrifice was, just having my parents start over completely from nothing. I mean, just imagine, right? They have in Iran, the newest cars, they have land, they have an apartment building, a nice apartment building in the center of the city. My dad has this great jobs in Iran. A neurosurgeon is kind of like top of the heap as far as jobs because it's, only the brightest can get this job. It's like a testing system that, basically you get to pick based on how well you do on this test. My dad happened to do really well and was able to become a neurosurgeon. So to give all that up, and then we're in America, my mom is working full-time, like more than full-time, probably like 70-hour weeks at a dry cleaners, because this is, it's a Persian guy. We knew that she was able to get a job there. My dad is studying during the day, taking exams at night. I mean, this is all a sacrifice. for my mom so she could practice her faith freely, and for my dad so that he could, provide opportunity for his daughters. He saw, if I could raise my daughters in America, they can be doctors. They can, they don't have to get the top score on the exam. They can all be doctors, is what he thought, or just have opportunities to live somewhere different and have more freedoms as we don't have in Iran. And so yeah, there was a lot of sacrifice. And I think that's why I mentioned my sister and I, we both felt these huge obligations. Like my parents gave up so much. We saw what they gave up, how hard they worked so that we could, make something of our lives to give back like in the way they did. And that's what we hope to try to do, even though we're not doctors. We're trying to give back in the best way we can. My younger sister is a doctor, so
Oh,
they
wow.
did get one doctor out of us, and then my younger brother is in pharmacy school. So
And your credentials are just way out there too. I'm so incredibly amazed. But the gospel does. The part of the show that we do is called Seekers of Christ. Is that when we
yes,
know Christ and we stay on the covenant path, I really truly believe that the doors will be opened if we are but patient and we are actively engaged, and not only in the Lord's work, but actively engaged and being productive. You know, uh,
yes,
Today there's so many individuals, including myself, that were stuck on this thing and wasting a lot of time. And it's hard that once you're into that, you kind of get lost for hours in useless things. But
yeah,
when we're actively engaged, it takes perseverance. We need to stay engaged. You know, I'd hate to think of how many hours you've spent in studying what you had to give up. Even though you probably were in Relief Society or other major callings, what would you say to the sisters in the church who are really struggling and questioning, is this all really worth it?
oh, such a great question. I think that's what a lot of people are asking right now, right? Is it really worth it? And I can say, as you're talking about all the things we give up to be members of the church, right? Yes, you give up your time. Yes, there's costs involved, right? Every time I teach primary, I'm buying snacks, I'm, taking time to prayer lessons. But it's so interesting because, I want to go secular before I go spiritual on this. But when you look at the research on what makes people happy, it is those things. The more of your time, your talents, your resources that you give up for other people, that then you are also happier. And it's funny because of course that's the way, right? God tells us to give up of ourselves, right? Leave everything and follow him. The more we can consecrate to building his kingdom, that's how we gain happiness. And so when you think, oh, it's such a sacrifice to go to church, and it's such a sacrifice to give tithing, and it's such a sacrifice to wear my garments, or any of these things that people struggle with today, for those who have had experiences not having those things, they know. And there's a great podcast, I don't know if you're familiar with the Comeback podcast, where people bear testimonies every week, where she has these guests of people that have left the church, and then they had tasted the fruits, they lost them, and they came back. And I think there's just that much more joy in it because people realize that happiness is found in the gospel of Jesus Christ,
Yeah.
right? An intimate closeness with the atonement of Jesus Christ and the teachings of the restored gospel are what bring us happiness in the short term, and then everlasting joy in the long term. We know that through the scriptures. We know that from experience. I know that from my own experience, that those are the things that bring me happiness. So it's like, if I think I'm giving something up by spending my time in the temple versus at a bar, I'm actually not. I'm gaining more happiness.
Sure.
And so, those are those things. I was like, momentary pleasures. Sure, I can imagine that's fun to go hang out at the bar or go dancing, or whatever kind of life pleasures can come your way. But when you go home at the end of the night, what's going to give you the most lasting joy? It's doing his work. And that's why I love this podcast that you're doing. I actually was driven myself in, I think 2020 I started praying for this, but in 2022 I also got on social media myself,
Yeah.
which was very scary as a law professor, and started first on TikTok. I don't even know if you're on TikTok, but
I am.
I started on TikTok preaching about Jesus Christ, and then I moved to Instagram because God told me to do so. It was the Spirit that said, you need to get on TikTok. I had a friend that worked for the church, and she said to me, oh, I just wish the church could get on TikTok because there's just so much negativity and darkness on there. And as I got on there, which, it's like one of those things I banished my kids from getting, and they're like, wait, you're on TikTok, Mom? And I'm like, yes, but for the right reasons. I'm trying to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ, but I've gotten so many more blessings. I think you referred to this earlier, just there's so many blessings that come when you try to do his work.
Yeah.
And again, we're not doing it perfectly, right? Like, my reach is not great, and we all do our parts, but I've seen this, and I'm sure you have too, but just even those individual people that reach out that have found the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or found Jesus, or like learned something uplifting that day where they wouldn't have in the past, or without your channel, it's all worth it, right? Even one soul, if you can bring them unto Christ, it's worth it.
Yeah, it just takes, if we could just reach just one person,
That's right.
the joy in heaven is crazy. Now, just before we close, you made mention, I think a lot of people get confused with the topic, and that is this: finding happiness and joy, the differentiation between the two.
Yes.
How
Well,
would
it's
you
interesting
explain
because it's interesting. So I don't think it's a mistake, but I actually think both come through living the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I think there's some distinction in the world of, there's happiness and then there's joy, and joy is found through the gospel. But when you read the Book of Mormon carefully, it does talk about happiness as well, coming from the gospel of Jesus Christ and living those teachings. So I don't think that's a mistake personally. I know there's some debate on it in the world, but I do think that both short-term happiness and everlasting joy are found through living the gospel of Jesus Christ, particularly, as you brought up earlier, living your covenants. Like, the closer we can get to our Savior through going to the temple, his house, and feeling of his love, and the closer we can get to God by praying and reading the words of his prophets through General Conference, through scriptures. I mean, to me, that's when I feel the most happy in my life. And I've tested those fruits, right? I know that those fruits are real, that I'm happier on my worst days, right? Like, if I'm depressed, like, what do? I try to read my scriptures. I listen to music that reminds me that I'm a child of God. That's what brings me happiness, even in the short term. And I don't think I mentioned this to you, but I'm teaching a class at BYU next semester. It's called The Pursuit of Happiness, how following God's laws brings individual and collective happiness. And so I do think there is a magic to living a covenant life and how it can bring us happiness.
Yeah, it's really amazing. Yeah. Thank you, Sister Shima. Yeah. I know that you're super busy, and I really appreciate you taking the time out for us. What I got from your message today, if I got this right, and that is that, really the gospel is not a sacrifice. What it is that it's a road to happiness and ultimate joy. And if we are but persistent, and we stay on the covenant path, and by following our prophet and the general authorities, they're leading us to Christ. As a former ordinance worker in the temple, I surely miss it. It's been 6 months since I've been released, but
those are the happiest people. I would love to do a survey. Maybe I should do that, actually.
Sure.
Maybe I'll talk to but I'd love to do a survey of ordinance workers. I believe that they're probably some of the happiest people in our church. I'm not kidding. Because they're spending time in the Lord's house.
Yeah.
Because every time I go there, and I don't go for as long as you all do, I'm so happy. And it really does bring this happiness. It's just being in God's house.
Well, what one thing I can let you know is that there are no groups other than one. There's no different levels of society. Everybody's one. You could be a gajillionaire, but when you come and you're dressed in white, you are equivalent to the individual that is impoverished. When we're dressed in white, we are all one in the sight of God. And what brings me joy is that everybody's treated the same.
I love that.
We are there to be edified, to come to know the Savior better, to understand God's plan for us. And that is truly the plan of happiness. So I get emotional about it, but I
can imagine.
When we were trained many years ago, the president said in one of the teachings, says, the temple is the only place where Heavenly Father wants to spend one-on-one time with each one of us.
Oh, I love that. I've never heard that before, and it's so beautiful. That's how it feels to me. I feel like the conduits to heaven are just more opened and more clear.
Yeah.
I'm able to hear inspiration so much more readily in the temple, and that's why I think we're able to be blessed so much more there, because he does have one-on-one time with us, right? Oh, I love that visual of like
Yeah,
one-on-one time. You think of it as a parent, right?
it's where we
Having that precious one-on-one time with your kids. And that's what he gets when I sit in the celestial room and I'm able to spend that time with him. I just feel so much clearer and so much more perspective. It's like that.
yeah,
You know how like I don't know if you had this when you were younger, but I remember being younger going home from college or even in my 20s
yeah,
going home and just feeling grounded.
yeah,
Like, okay, these are my parents. I feel like and magnify that times 100 in God's
yeah.
house, right?
So,
We feel like we know who we are when we go there
yeah.
and we know our future, like the important parts, and then everything feels like it's going to work out. That's how I feel.
And that's where the ultimate joy really is. So, Sister
It
Shima,
is.
you have a beautiful family there. Thank you so much for being
Thank
on the show
you.
today. God bless you for the
Bye
work
bye.
that you
Bye
do,
bye.
sister. And all those that are listening, I encourage you to listen to a lot of Sister Shima's casts or BYU talks, which I just finished listening to. I encourage
Oh,
it
thanks.
deeply. You'll be empowered. So, Sister Shima, thank you so much for being on the show
Thank
today.
you. Thank you for this great work. I'm so grateful to know you.
Yeah, until next time, God bless. Now, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Seekers of Christ and have found it inspiring. For more insights on God's plan of happiness for you, you can visit our website at gospelfirst.net. Now, I'd love to hear from you, so please leave your questions or comments in the comments section of this video. Also, you can help me spread the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ by hitting the like, subscribe, and share button. Together, we can make a difference. So until next time, God bless.